Family, let's be real. When someone ignores you, it cuts deep. It makes you question your worth, your presence, and sometimes even your purpose. Silence from someone you care about can feel louder than words. But I came to tell you today that even in that sting, there's a sign. God doesn't waste pain, and He doesn't let rejection touch you unless He intends to use it as redirection. That cold shoulder, that unanswered text, that overlooked presence, it might hurt, but it's not random. There's something God is revealing in the silence, and if you can lean into it, you'll see that being ignored is not the end of your value, but the beginning of your being ignored reveals who is truly aligned with your destiny. You see, sometimes we don't know the true hearts of the people around us until their silence speaks louder than their presence ever did. The sting of being ignored pulls the mask off relationships that we thought were real, but in truth were only convenient. You never truly know the depth of someone's loyalty until you've experienced the emptiness of their absence. And though it feels painful when they don't respond, when they act like you don't exist, or when they choose to withhold acknowledgement, what's really happening is revelation. God is showing you who can walk with you into your next season and who cannot. Destiny is too heavy to be carried by people who aren't built to handle it. And sometimes we think we need the applause, the attention, and the affirmation of people in order to walk in our calling. But if they can ignore you, if they can dismiss you, if they can watch your struggle and choose silence, that's a sign that they don't carry the capacity to value your destiny. The silence reveals their limit. And you've got to stop taking it personally when God allows people to show you their limits. Not everyone who walked with you in one season is meant to stand with you in the next. When someone ignores you, it pushes you to see the truth about who is really in your corner. People can say they love you, they can say they're for you, but when the moments of life hit, the storms, the valleys, the questions, you'll discover the ones who see you and the ones who act like you're invisible. And that discovery isn't meant to break you, it's meant to free you. Because why would you want to keep pouring your energy, your prayers, your trust into a vessel that doesn't have the ability to pour back? This revelation doesn't just protect you, it preserves you. It preserves your energy from being drained by people who never intended to invest in you. It preserves your heart from being tied to people who don't carry the grace to nurture it. It preserves your time from being wasted in relationships that will never grow into what you hoped they would be. And while your flesh may crave their attention, your spirit is being trained to crave alignment. Think about it. Jesus himself was ignored, dismissed, overlooked, even in his own hometown. The Bible says he could do no mighty works there because of their unbelief. That means even Jesus had to face the reality that not everyone would recognize him, not everyone would celebrate him, not everyone would respond to him. But their silence didn't stop his assignment. Their lack of attention didn't cancel his destiny. It only revealed the boundary of their belief. That's what being ignored does for you. It draws the boundary lines of who has the faith to walk with you and who doesn't. You've been crying over their silence, but God is saying, that's your sign. That's your sign of misalignment. That's your sign that their chapter in your story is closing. That's your sign that you're entering into a place where not everyone can follow. And the quicker you accept the sign, the quicker you can move forward without the weight of unnecessary attachments. So instead of mourning the ones who don't see you, start celebrating the ones who do. Instead of obsessing over the silence of those who ignore you, start nurturing the connections that recognize you. Because destiny doesn't require everyone, it just requires the right ones. And being ignored is not a reflection of your lack of worth. It's a reflection of their lack of vision. Sometimes the loudest blessing God gives you is silence. You may not recognize it at first because when someone ignores you, it feels like rejection. It feels like you're not worth a response, like you've been cast aside. But what if the silence you're feeling isn't punishment, it's protection? What if God is shielding your spirit from voices that would contaminate your peace, confuse your identity, or derail your purpose? We live in a world addicted to noise. Everyone has an opinion. Everyone has something to say. Everyone wants to comment, to post, to share. But not every voice is meant to be poured into your soul. Not every word is meant to have access to your heart. When God allows silence, when He permits someone to ignore you, He is filtering out the unnecessary noise so that His word can be the clearest in your life. You've got to understand that your spirit is sensitive. What you hear consistently shapes what you believe, and what you believe dictates how you live. If you constantly hear negativity, you'll start to shrink. If you constantly hear doubt, you'll start to question your calling. If you constantly hear criticism, you'll start to sabotage your own growth. So sometimes God will allow people to stop speaking to you, not because you did something wrong, but because their words were never supposed to become the soundtrack of your destiny. That silence that feels so heavy is actually a filter. It's God's hand over your ears saying, don't listen to that. Don't let that get inside of you. Because He knows that one wrong word, one wrong opinion, one careless dismissal can plant seeds of insecurity that grow into trees of self-doubt. And if you're not careful, you'll find yourself living in the shade of somebody else's unbelief instead of standing in the light of God's truth about you. Think about Elijah. After his greatest victory, he ran into the wilderness, broken, tired, and scared. He looked for God in the wind, in the earthquake, in the fire, but God wasn't in any of that noise. The Bible says God's voice came in a gentle whisper. Sometimes you can't hear the whisper of God until the noise around you is silenced, and sometimes that silence feels like being ignored. But in reality, it's God making sure nothing drowns out His whisper. That's why you can't take it personally when people stop talking to you, when their energy shifts, or when they withhold communication. Some of those conversations would have been distractions. Some of those voices would have caused you to doubt what God is building inside of you. Some of that noise would have kept you stuck trying to live up to expectations God never put on your life. Silence is not abandonment, it's insulation. It's God wrapping your spirit in peace while He prepares you for the next level. And let's be real, sometimes we want so badly to hear from people, to get validation, to feel connected, that we miss the reality that their words never had the power to define us in the first place. If someone ignores you, that doesn't mean you've lost your value. It means God is teaching you to stop depending on external noise to measure internal worth. Because if you keep needing noise, you'll always be tossed around by who claps for you and who doesn't, who acknowledges you and who doesn't, who calls you back and who doesn't. But when you learn to embrace silence, you discover a strength that is not swayed by the volume of others, but anchored in the whisper of God. So the next time you feel ignored, pause and ask yourself, what noise is God protecting me from? Whose words did He block from reaching me? What distraction did He silence so I could hear Him more clearly? Because once you realize the silence isn't rejection but redirection, you'll stop fighting for noise and start leaning into the stillness where His voice is waiting. There's something about being ignored that makes you question yourself. You start replaying conversations, wondering if you said too much, wondering if you weren't enough, wondering if maybe you did something wrong. The silence presses on your insecurities and makes you crave validation more than ever. But what if that craving is the very thing God is trying to heal in you? What if the sting of being ignored is not about what you lost from them, but about what you're about to find within yourself? When people ignore you, they are withholding something your flesh wants: attention, acknowledgement, validation. And for many of us, we've been conditioned since childhood to believe that our value is tied to who notices us, who praises us, who applauds us. We were trained to perform for approval, to seek out validation like oxygen, because somewhere along the line we believed we couldn't breathe without it. But God is trying to break that cycle. He's trying to teach you that you don't need the crowd to clap for you when heaven is already standing in ovation. Ignored moments are uncomfortable, but they are also powerful. They force you to sit in the silence long enough to realize that your worth doesn't diminish because someone doesn't see it. Their blindness does not cancel your brilliance. Their silence does not erase your significance. But you only learn that truth when you stop reaching for their validation and start anchoring yourself in God's affirmation. Look at Jesus, ignored by religious leaders, dismissed by crowds, misunderstood by his own disciples at times. If he had built his identity on whether or not people approved of him, his ministry would have ended before the cross. But Jesus knew that his Father had already validated him at the Jordan River when he declared, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." That was enough. That was his anchor. And because of that validation from heaven, he could endure being ignored by earth. That's what God is doing in you when he allows people to overlook you. He's pulling you back to his voice. He's reminding you that before they ever saw you, he called you. Before they ever approved of you, he appointed you. Before they ever acknowledged your gift, he placed it inside of you. So why live thirsty for the validation of people who don't even have the power to change your destiny? Every time you survive being ignored, you're strengthening your ability to validate yourself. You're learning to look in the mirror and say, "I am fearfully and wonderfully made." You're training your spirit to declare, "I am chosen, I am loved, I am called," even when nobody else is echoing it back to you. And the more you practice this, the less power other people's silence has over you. Because here's the truth: validation is addictive. Once you get a taste of it, you want more. You start depending on it. But dependence on people is dangerous because people are inconsistent. One day they're for you, the next day they're not. One day they're clapping, the next day they're silent. But God is steady. His validation doesn't waver. His approval doesn't shift. And if you root yourself in that, you'll never have to beg for acknowledgement again. So maybe their silence is the very soil God is using to grow your self-validation. Maybe every ignored moment is a training ground, breaking the chains of people-pleasing and raising up the strength of God confidence. Because when you finally learn how to validate yourself, when you finally stop chasing after approval, you step into a freedom that no silence can take from you. You stop performing and start becoming. You stop shrinking and start expanding. You stop waiting for permission and start walking in purpose. Rejection has a way of piercing your soul like nothing else. When someone ignores you, dismisses you, or turns their back on you, it can feel like a door slamming shut in your face. And our natural instinct is to chase the closed door, to knock harder, to beg for entry, because we don't like the sting of being unwanted. But what if that very rejection is not about keeping you out, but about guiding you into the right spaces with the right people at the right time? You see, rejection isn't always about you not being good enough. More often, it's about God protecting you from what isn't aligned with your destiny. The silence of someone you thought would always be there may hurt, but it's often the loudest signal that they were never supposed to be part of your journey forward. Rejection becomes redirection when you stop asking, "Why not them?" and start trusting what's next, God. Think about Ruth. She was widowed, rejected by circumstances she couldn't control. She had every reason to stay stuck, to cling to what was familiar, to mourn what was lost. But her rejection in Moab was her redirection into Bethlehem. And it was in Bethlehem that she met Boaz, stepped into provision, and became part of the lineage of Jesus Christ. If Ruth had stayed where she was ignored, she never would have walked into the divine connection God had prepared for her. That's the beauty of God. He doesn't waste rejection. Every time someone ignores you, he's giving you clarity. He's saying, don't pour yourself here because this ground can't grow you. Don't invest here because this soil won't nourish you. Don't linger here because this door leads nowhere. It feels like loss, but it's actually direction. It feels like you're being shut out, but you're really being guided in. And let's be real, sometimes we don't even recognize unhealthy attachments until they reject us. Sometimes it takes their silence for us to see that we were chasing attention that never matched our worth. God will allow rejection to shift your focus so you stop forcing connections that drain you and start recognizing the divine ones that will sustain you. When you stop mourning who ignored you, you make space for who God is sending. Divine connections don't require you to beg to be seen. They don't require you to fight for attention. They recognize your value without you having to prove it. They celebrate your presence without making you earn it. That's how you know it's divine, because what God connects, no man can ignore. Even Jesus experienced this. The very people he came to save rejected him, mocked him, and ignored his divinity. Yet in that rejection, God redirected him to the cross, the place where his greatest purpose would be revealed. What looked like the world turning its back on him was really God aligning him with the connection that mattered most, humanity's reconciliation with heaven. So when you're ignored, stop chasing after explanations and start leaning into expectation. Expect that if God closed that door, he has already prepared another one. Expect that if they turned away, he has someone else on the way. Expect that if their silence broke your heart, his plan will heal it with something better. Rejection is painful, but it is never wasted. That's why you don't have to be bitter when they ignore you. You don't have to spend nights proving your worth to people who walked away. Instead, you can lift your head, dust off your heart, and walk into the truth that rejection was the vehicle God used to steer you toward your destiny. Because every no from man is simply making room for God's greater yes. There is a peculiar silence that comes when you've been overlooked. You show up, you give your best, you pour your heart, and still it feels like nobody notices. No applause, no recognition, no invitation. And it stings because deep down we all long to be seen, to be valued, to be acknowledged. But I've learned that being overlooked can actually become one of the greatest classrooms God uses to sharpen your spiritual hearing. When people don't notice you, you're forced to lean into the one who always does. When the room forgets your name, heaven still calls you chosen. When the crowd doesn't clap, God still whispers, well done. Being overlooked pulls you away from the noise of people's opinions and places you in a posture where God's voice becomes the only one that matters. Think about David. His father didn't even consider him worthy of the lineup when Samuel came to anoint the next king. All his brothers stood before the prophet, but David was overlooked, left in the field with the sheep. Yet in that overlooked place, David was hearing from God. He was writing psalms, he was building intimacy, he was sharpening his ear. So by the time the oil flowed over his head, David wasn't dependent on public validation. He was anchored in private revelation. That's the power of being overlooked. It takes away the props of human affirmation so you can strengthen the muscles of divine intimacy. Because if you only move when people notice you, you'll live your life waiting for applause that may never come. But when you learn to move at the sound of God's whisper, you'll step into purpose whether people see you or not. Being overlooked trains you to value God's approval above man's. It rewires your heart so that you no longer crave the recognition of the crowd. And it's in those overlooked seasons that God often speaks the loudest, because he knows if he spoke in the crowd, you might confuse his voice with theirs. But in the silence of being overlooked, his voice becomes distinct. You begin to hear him in ways you couldn't when you were distracted by applause. Some of you have been asking, why do they ignore me? Why don't they see my value? Why don't they invite me? But maybe God allowed you to be overlooked so you could hear him say, daughter, I see you. Son, I've chosen you. Beloved, I've called you by name. Because if you can hear God's voice in the shadows, you'll never be shaken by the silence of men. And let me remind you, purpose doesn't need permission to be valid. You don't need to be acknowledged to be anointed. Oil flows even in obscurity, calling rests on you, whether the crowd claps or not. And sometimes the very reason you've been overlooked is because God is protecting the sacredness of your process. He's hiding you until the appointed time, because what he's birthing in you can't be exposed too soon. Being overlooked is not evidence of abandonment, it's evidence of preservation. It's God saying, I'm keeping you close enough to me that you learn my voice before you're ever tempted to live for theirs. Because once you learn his voice in the shadows, you'll be unstoppable in the spotlight. So don't despise being overlooked. Don't let it make you bitter. Let it sharpen your hearing. Let it train your spirit. Let it push you deeper into the secret place where his whisper speaks louder than any applause ever could. Because at the end of the day, the crowd's recognition fades, but God's voice sustains. And if you can hear him clearly, you can walk boldly even when no one else sees you. Being ignored feels like a wound you can't quite explain. It's not always the sharpness of words that breaks you, it's the absence of them. It's the unanswered message, the unreturned call, the glance that looks right past you as if you don't exist. And in that emptiness, it's easy to wonder, why me? Why do they treat me like I don't matter? But what if the space they left vacant was actually room God was clearing so he could meet you there? What if being ignored was never about their silence, but about your encounter with purpose? There are moments when God uses rejection to strip away distractions so he can reveal what he placed inside of you all along. When people ignore you, it creates a hunger in your soul, a longing to be seen and understood. And God will use that hunger not to push you back toward people, but to pull you deeper into purpose. Because purpose isn't found in the validation of others, it's discovered in the presence of God. Think about Joseph. His brothers ignored his value. They dismissed his dreams. They threw him into a pit and sold him into slavery. In their eyes, he was disposable, but in God's eyes, Joseph was destined. Their rejection didn't erase his purpose. It positioned him to step into it. Because it was in Egypt, not at home, that Joseph discovered who he really was. And sometimes it's not in the familiar embrace of acceptance, but in the lonely silence of being ignored that you encounter the fire of your assignment. Purpose has a way of finding you when the noise around you dies down. When you're no longer trying to prove yourself to people who can't see you, you begin to hear the quiet conviction of who God called you to be. The silence becomes sacred. The emptiness becomes a canvas. And the very thing that hurt you, their ignorance of your value, becomes the place God fills with clarity. That's why being ignored can actually be a gift in disguise. It forces you to confront the question, who am I when nobody claps, nobody notices, nobody affirms? And when you lean into that question with God, you discover an unshakable truth. You are still chosen, still called, still equipped, still worthy. Purpose doesn't dissolve because people look away. In fact, sometimes it sharpens when they do. Because here's the truth. Purpose is not found in being seen by man. It's found in being sent by God. And when you stop fighting to be noticed, you start living to be obedient. When you stop chasing the crowd, you start chasing destiny. When you stop mourning who ignored you, you start embracing the one who appointed you. Even Jesus, at the height of his calling, was ignored by many who couldn't recognize who he was. Yet that rejection didn't deter him, it clarified him. He knew his assignment wasn't about winning every eye, but about fulfilling his Father's will. That's what purpose does. It takes you beyond the pain of being overlooked and plants you in the soil of destiny where fruit will grow regardless of who is watching. So the next time someone ignores you, shift your perspective. Don't just see the wound, see the window. Don't just see the silence, see the setup. Don't just see the absence, see the opportunity. Because their ignorance isn't the end of your story, it's the environment where God is cultivating your encounter with purpose. And when that purpose rises, when it blossoms out of the soil of rejection, you'll realize that being ignored didn't break you, it built you, it positioned you. It stripped away what you didn't need so you could stand boldly in what you were created to do. And that's the power of God. He takes the silence that once hurt you and turns it into the sound of destiny calling your name. Clarity.